Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. We're still in the middle of this horrific war, and so our learning is still dedicated to the success of our soldiers and the return of the captives, and a refuah shlema for those who are hurt, and a nechama for those who've lost children and siblings and parents. Okay, this week, different Rambans, but maybe all on the theme of the sale of Yosef, and more specifically, the interpretation of his dreams and Paro's dreams and the fulfillment of his dreams. But let's start with really a simple one, which is, if everyone knew that there was going to be a famine, why didn't all the surrounding areas save their extra food? Right? If there was first a Sava Gadol and then there was a Ra'av, so why didn't people just save their food? So the Ramban says in Pasuk Bet at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Vihine, translating the dream of Paro, Vihine min hayaor olot sheva parot yifot mareh uvriot basar vatirana ba'achu. Okay, and from the Yaor came 7 beautiful cows, and they were seen in the marshland. Says the Ramban, Ba'avur ki eretz Misrayim tishte min hayaor. Umimena balahem hasova v'hara'av. Right? It's not just the Nile is where the dream happened. The Nile is representative because the Nile is what nourishes all of Egypt. It doesn't really get regular rain. So ra'autan olot min hayor. So to let you know that this has to do with Mitzrayim, it tells you they came up from the Nile. V'haparot simon lacharisha. The Ramban thinks of 2 different dreams. The cows are a sign that there won't be any plowing. V'hashibolim simon lakatzir. And the ears of corn, the ears of whatever, they're a sign that there won't be any harvest. Now, to our issue. I'm skipping 2 lines in the Ramban. V'haniremi mashmak tuvim, ki haya hasova be'eretz Mitzrayim levada. Says the Ramban, the 7 years of plenty, they were only in Egypt. Ka'ashen nomar sava gadol b'chal eretz Mitzrayim. It's limited to Eretz Mitzrayim. V'chein asher hayu be'eretz Mitzrayim. It only happened in Egypt. Aval hara'av haya b'chal ha'aratzot. But the famine, that covered, it's hard to know how much of the globe, but it covered all the surrounding areas. V'chein patar Yosef v'kamu sheva shnei ra'av v'lo yizkir be'eretz Mitzrayim. Right? With respect to plenty, he says with Eretz Mitzrayim. With respect to famine, he says there will be a famine. Va'al kain lo yachlu b'shah ha'aratzot likbots ochel. Therefore, other countries were unable to gather extra food. Va'afilu im shamu ha'inyan ki haya mefursam ma'od. Says the Ramban, it's an interesting insight. He says all the surrounding areas knew that Egypt was gathering all their food in preparation for a famine. Whether they knew Paro's dreams or not, it's hard to know in the Ramban. But they knew this was going on. But they couldn't do that. Not that they had a famine, but they simply didn't have extra food. V'ulai b'chalom remez bazeh b'ma likbots ochel va'afilu im sham'u ha'inyan ki v'ulai b'chalom ramaz bazeh b'ma shehizkir vatirena ba'achu ki sham hayam mirehem u'ma'amadan. Aval haraot acharei achlanat hatavot titalachna ba'aretz v'lo yada paro ad ana halchu. Right? The plenty years, that happened in the marshlands of the Nile. But then when the scrawny cows ate the fat cows, they went off, and Paro didn't know where they went. And the idea is that the famine was going to occur in all the surrounding areas. But the years of plenty, that was just going to be in Mitzrayim. And so therefore, other countries that had heard in advance what Egypt was doing, they were unable to emulate it because they simply didn't have the food to do so. Okay, that's the first Ramban on this week's Parsha. The second Ramban is also very, very simple, but it's important for the Ramban's views going forward. The Ramban says towards the end of that parak, so Yosef translates the dreams of Paro, and that makes complete sense. But then you have really a staggering pasuk. Va'ata yeref Paro ish navon v'chacham v'shiteo al aretz Mitzrayim ya'aseh Paro v'yafked pekidim al aretz. Right? All of a sudden, Yosef out of nowhere translates Paro's dreams, and then he starts giving advice. Paro, you should put somebody in charge of the country to gather all the food. Why would he do that? Where does it come from? And the very end of that Ramban, just a few words, says the Ramban, Va'amar Yosef kol zeh ba'avur sheyivcharu oto. No, Yosef knew what he was doing. Right? Maybe this is obvious to you, but it was less obvious to me. Yosef wanted Paro to pick him. Right? Yosef had dreams of greatness, and Yosef believed in himself. And so after he translated or he interpreted Paro's dreams, where I would have thought to myself, okay, if I did a good job, thank God I'm going to get out of jail, maybe something good will happen to me. No, Yosef says, Paro, you need to put someone in charge of the land. Ki hachacham einav barosho. Meaning, you have to look out for yourself. If you're a chacham and you can see the future, and you, like Yosef, can see an opportunity, not just to get out of jail, but to become great, and as we'll see later in the Ramban, to fulfill your dreams and to make good on the promises that you understand that God gave you, you need to take chances. So Chazal make fun of Yosef. They don't make fun of Yosef, but Chazal don't look kindly on Yosef for having asked the Sar HaMashkim to remember him, right? V'lo zochacha Sar HaMashkim et Yosef ha'ishkacheu, and he has to say, Vayhi Miketz shantayim yamim, he had to stay in jail another 2 years. Maybe too much ishtadlut on Yosef's part. Maybe he thought he could really get it done himself without HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But here the Ramban is very complimentary of Yosef. Yosef saw an opportunity to get a great job, to become the Mishnah LaMelech as he's about to be. And he says to Paro, here's the interpretation of the dreams. And then he took this great chance. And he said, you know what, Paro, what you should do is you should find somebody who's really smart, who can run your country, and who can conserve all the additional food from the years of plenty for the years of famine. And the Ramban says Yosef did that because he wanted to be chosen. And there you really see, right? I think you really see in the Ramban, Yosef's self-confidence. For all the fact that his life has been difficult and he's been knocked down so many times, Yosef believes he's going to be great. And if he's going to be great, he needs to take this opportunity to put himself forth for greatness. And so he does it, and it works. Okay, it works so well that Paro gives him a new name. Okay, says the Torah, Vayikra Pharaoh Shem Yosef Tzofinat Pa'aneach, Vayiten lo et Osnat bat Potifera Kohen on leisha, Vayetze Yosef al Eretz Mitzrayim. Paro gives him a new name, and he gives him a wife, and Yosef goes out to meet his subjects. What does Tzofnat Pa'aneach mean? So, well, you know what? Let's look at the Ramban. What is Tzofnat Paneach? And what language is Tzofnat Paneach? And really, it's going to come to the question of names in the Torah. We're going to see in a few weeks the greatest person who ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu, Ki min hamayim mishitihu. Wait, did Bat Paro know Hebrew? That she took the word mishitihu, I drew him from the water, and turned it into the name Moshe? So the Ramban has an interesting insight. Pasuk Memhei, Tzofnat Paneach, says, Amar Rabbi Avraham, first Ibn Ezra, Imhi mila mitzrit lo yadanu perusha. If Tzofnat Paneach is Egyptian, we don't know what it means because we don't know Egyptian. V'im miturgemet lo yadanu shem Yosef. And if it's a translation, so we don't know what name they called Yosef. So continues the Ramban. Valdat harishonim shomrim hamifaneach ne'elamim. That Tzofnat Paneach means the person who reveals secrets, the person who understands secrets, which makes complete sense in context. That's what Paro would call Yosef. Yitachen shekara lo shem nichbad ki lishon artso ki sha'alo. Right? The Ramban's first idea is Paro said to Yosef, how do you say revealer of secrets in Hebrew? Because Paro knew that Yosef came from the Eretz HaIvrim, and Hebrew was his language, and he wanted to make him feel good, and he wanted to make him feel great, and he wanted Yosef to understand his new name. So he said to Yosef, what does it mean? how do you translate revealer of dreams in Hebrew? And he told him, okay, tzafnat paneach. And Paro said, great, I dub you tzafnat paneach. Another possibility, O shehaya hamelech yodea sfat eretz Canaan hakrova elav. Or maybe Paro knew Hebrew. Right? All these medrashim about Paro knowing 70 languages. Okay, maybe he knew Hebrew. V'inyano tzifuna megula, or megala. And Paro knew that tzafnas paneach meant the interpreter or the revealer of dreams or of secrets. Now, the more interesting part. V'chein bito kara shem Moshe Rabbeinu kilashon amo min hamayim mishitihu. Says the Ramban, Batya, the daughter of Paro, named Moshe in Hebrew. Ki min hamayim mishitihu. It was a Hebrew word. Apparently she knew Hebrew. Now, why she would have wanted to name him a Hebrew name, which in theory at least would have revealed to everybody that he was Jewish, that's a good question. I can't answer that question. But the Ramban continues. Va'al tishtomeim ba'avur shekaruhu sofrei hamitzrayim munius. What are we going to do with the fact, says the Ramban, that Bat Paro named her son Moshe, or named the son of what's the name of Moshe's mother? No, Miriam was Moshe's sister. Moshe's mother was Yocheved. Okay, so it was Yocheved's son, but he named him Moshe. So why they call him Munius? So this is ki yishanu hashemot l'lashon muvan o murga lahem kasher ya'aseh tirgum b'ktsatam. He said because people translate the name into a name that's known in the area that we're talking about. So Egyptians didn't have the name Moshe, but they did have the name Munios. So when Egyptian historians wrote down Moshe's name, they wrote down Munios because it made sense to describe Moshe in a name or with a name that's consistent with the names that were used in Egypt. Okay, there's a fascinating idea that Batya, because there's a whole discussion amongst Rishonim later on when Moshe is born and named, why would she name him a Hebrew name? How could it be? What does it make sense? And there's a whole bunch of mefarshim there. But here the Ramban says it's a simple thing. She named him a Hebrew name, I guess because she knew he was Hebrew, he was Jewish. And then Egyptians later on called him either just in the history books or for real, they called him Munius because that was an Egyptian name. But his real name was Moshe. Okay, fascinating stuff. Now, let's get back to the dream theme and do a really, really important Ramban. Okay, the question the Ramban's going to answer, which is a famous question. Well, you know what? Even before that, we'll do one more Ramban before we get there. Okay? Why did Yosef recognize his brothers, but they didn't recognize him? Says the Torah in Perek Mem Bet Pasuk Chet, Vayaker Yosef et achav v'heim lo hikiruhu. Yosef recognized his brothers, but the brothers did not recognize Yosef. Why not? So says the Ramban, Klal. V'lo hutzrach od lehitnaker alehem. Right? They didn't recognize Yosef at all. Therefore, he didn't have to hide his face. Right? The Ramban thinks, Vayitnaker Yosef alehem, it means he was kind of hiding his face because he was afraid they would recognize him. But now I realize they don't recognize him. V'amru rabotenu b'tam ha'hakara lefi shehinicham chatumei zakan v'heim lo kihikiruhu sheyatsa me'etzlam below chatimat zakan va'achshav mitzauhu b'chatimat zakan. Right? Yosef recognized them because they all had beards when he was sent away by his father and when he was kidnapped. But they didn't recognize Yosef because when he left the house, he did not have a beard. And now he did have a beard, so he looked completely different. But the Ramban points out, as he's done before, as we've seen together, but it's not true that the brothers were 20 years older than Yosef, or 10 years older than Yosef. Yisachar and Zvulun were his age, essentially. Einam gedolim Yosef rak ma'at, aval kevan shehi kirat hagdolim, he kirat kulam. But because Yosef recognized the older brothers, he recognized all of them. Va'od hayam makiram. Okay. Va'od hayam makiram mida'ato she'avo sham. In addition, and this is an important point in the Ramban, in addition, Yosef was hoping they would come. Right? We've seen this before. Yosef, despite all the difficulties, he had dreams. And he wanted his dreams to come true. And one of them was that the brothers were going to come and bow down to him. So Yosef in some way was looking forward to it. So when the brothers came, it wasn't like he had to put them in context. He had expected them to come. V'heim lo hikiruhu shelo natnu libam sheyeh ha'eved ashem mecharo la'yishmeelim hu hashalit al haaretz. But they had no dream that the brother that they had sold to the Ishmaelites would become the prime minister of Egypt. No way. So they saw Yosef out of context. They had no reason to suspect that he was their brother. But he saw the bunch of them together, and he recognized the oldest of them, and he saw an opportunity. And also he had been waiting for them. V'amar Rabbi Avraham vayakireim b'tchila yikir shehem echav va'acharei ken histakel b'chol echad v'hikiro. Says the Ibn Ezra, right? Originally, he saw the whole bunch of them, and he said, okay, these must be my brothers. Then he recognized each one of them individually. But the idea is that Yosef was expecting them to come, and therefore was on the lookout for them, and saw them in the context of all his brothers, but they had no thought whatsoever that the Yosef who they had sold all those years before had become the prime minister of Israel, of Egypt, and therefore they had no reason to suspect it was Yosef, and Yosef was free to talk to them because he knew that they didn't know it was him. Okay, next pasuk, and this is really, really important. Vayizkor Yosef et hachalomot asher cholam lohem. Yosef remembered the dreams that he had dreamt about them. Vayomer aleihem miragalim atem lirot et ervat haaretz batem. And therefore he gave them a hard time. Therefore he accused them of being spies. The Ramban says, Vayizkor Yosef et hachalomot asher cholam lohem aleihem. Doesn't mean to them, it means about them. V'yada shenitkaima sharei hishtachavu lo. Lashon Rashi. So the first thing is Rashi says, great. In that moment, Yosef knew that his dreams had come true, that the brothers were bowing to him, and therefore he felt great. But the Ramban says no. Ulefi da'ati shehadavar behefech. At that moment, Yosef realized that his dreams had not come true. Ki yomar hakatuv ki birot Yosef et echav mishtachavim lo zachar kol hachalomot asher cholam lohem v'yada shelo nitkayem echad mehem b'pam hazot. And he realized none of them had come true at that moment. Why? Ki yodea bepitronam. He knew the explanation of his dream. Ki kol echav yishtachavu lo b'tchila min hachalom harishon. Right? V'hine anachnu malmim alamim b'toch hasadeh. Right? V'hine kama lumati v'gam nitzav. Right? Ki anachnu yirmoz l'chol echav achad asar. So that's the first dream. That didn't come true because only 10 brothers came to visit him. Binyamin didn't come. Upam shenit yishtachavu lo hashemesh v'ayarech v'achad asar kochavim min hachalom hasheni v'kevan shelo ra'a Binyamin imahem chashav zot hatachpula sheya'alil aleihem kidei sheyaviu gam Binyamin echav elav lekayem hachalom harishon techila. Says the Ramban, and it's a famous Ramban. Yosef, in that moment when he sees his brothers in front of him, and let's imagine he sees 10 brothers bowing to him, he realizes that neither of his dreams had come true. His first dream was that 11 brothers bowed to him, and his second dream, his father, his mother, Bilhah, whoever that is, and 11 brothers. That didn't come true either. And Yosef in this moment thinks to himself, what can I do to get my dreams to come true? Right? And the answer he's going to come up with is some ploy to get Binyamin, the 11th brother, to come and bow to him as well. Va'al kain lo ratza lahagid lahem ani Yosef achichem v'leimor maharu va'alu el avi V'shalacha agalot kasher asa imohem b'pam hashniya. He doesn't want to reveal himself now. Why? Ki haya aviv ba miyad below safek. If he revealed himself, his father would have come immediately. Va'acharei shenitkayem hachalom harishon. But once he got Binyamin to come, and the first dream came true because 11 brothers bowed to him, he gid lahem likayem hachalom hasheni. Then he revealed himself in order to fulfill his second dream. Vilulei Cain, and this is the main point. Haya Yosef chotei chet gadol litzaeret aviv. Because if not for this, Yosef would have committed a terrible sin. Why? His father's in mourning over him. Yosef didn't have time to write an email, to send a postcard, to send someone to tell his father, not only am I alive, I'm the ruler of Egypt. V'lahamido yamim rabim b'shchol ve'evel al Shimon va'alav. Right? And to make his father mourn Shimon. Maybe he mourns Shimon, maybe he doesn't. That's a different Ramban. And for him, va'afim hayal ritzono litzaer et achav ktsat. Right? Maybe he wanted to get his brothers back. Right? Maybe in some way he wanted to take some form of revenge. Eich lo yachmol al sevat aviv. But how could he not worry about his father? Says the Ramban, aval et hakol asa yafeh be'ito likayem hachalomot ki yada sheyit kaimu be'emet. But rather, says the Ramban, he did everything to make his dreams come true because he knew his dreams were true and he wanted them to come true. Now, it's a great Ramban and there's plenty more to read. But the question that can be asked and that should be asked on the Ramban is, they were just dreams. Why would he have gone out of his way to make sure that his dreams come true? People have dreams all the time. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the dreams to come true, so he would have made the dreams come true. It's not for human beings to make their dreams come true. And it's not for human beings to make their parents suffer, or their father in this case suffer, so that the dream will come true. So I think it has to be in the Ramban that even though he uses the word chalomot, he really means nivuot. He really means some vision that Yosef had that he recognized as part of the Dvar Hashem, that he recognized it was his job to make come true. There's a famous article of Rav Yoel ben Nun, which is in, I think, the first or the second volume of Megadim. It's online. People should look for it. He has a fantastic pshat in which he disagrees with the Ramban. But we're learning Ramban, so let's continue. Gam ha'inyan ha'sheni she'asa lahem b'gavia. Right? Why did he plant the becher in the knapsack of Binyamin? Lo shetihiyeh kavanato litzaram. Says the Ramban, it wasn't a plan to torture them. Aval chashad ulai yesh lahem sina b'Binyamin sheyikanu oto ba'avat avihem kekinatam bo. He assumed that they hated Binyamin, or they were jealous of Binyamin, the same way they had been jealous of him. And maybe they were mistreating him. And maybe things weren't so good on the home front. O Shema hirgish Binyamin, or worse, maybe Binyamin figured out Shaya Yadam bi Yosef, that they had done what they had done. They had sold Yosef. Maybe Binyamin figured that out. V'nolda b'nhem kitatan. There was a fight, v'sina, and hatred. Va'al Cain lo ratza sheyelechi mahem Binyamin ulai yishlechu bo yadam. Imbadku otam bahavato. Says the Ramban, on the one hand, Yosef wanted to make sure that his dreams came true. Great. So that happened already. So why did he plant the Gavia in the knapsack of Binyamin? No, that has something else. That's because he was afraid to leave Binyamin with his brothers. Because either they were jealous of him, or he figured out what had happened to Yosef, and there was hatred between them. So if he could have kept Binyamin with him, he could have asked Binyamin the question, right? What's going on with my brothers? How are they treating you? What's the relationship like? So he really hoped that the brothers would leave Binyamin there. I'm skipping a little bit. V'chein ani omer shekol ha'inyanim ha'ele hayu b'Yosef mechachmato b'pitron ha'chalomot. All of this was part of Yosef understanding and making sure that his dreams came true. Ki yesh litmoa. Because if that's not the case, you have to ask the following question. And it's a great question. Achar she'amad Yosef b'Mitzrayim yamim rabim v'haya pakid v'nagid b'beit sar gadol b'Mitzrayim. Right? Once Yosef became a force in Mitzrayim, eich lo shalach kitav echad la'aviv lahodio l'nachamo. How did he not send a postcard to his father Yaakov? Ki Mitzrayim karov lechavron kishisha yamim. It's not halfway around the world, it's a 6-day journey. V'ilu haya mahalach shana haya ra'ui lahodia l'chvod aviv. And even if it took a year to get there, why didn't he tell his father? V'yekar pidyon nafsho v'iftenu b'rov mamon. His father certainly would have redeemed him from jail in all the money in the world. He loved Yosef. Rather, says the Ramban, aval haya ro'eh ki hishtachavayat achiv lo v'gam aviv v'chol zaro ito I efshar lihiyot ba'artzam. Says the Ramban, Yosef, even in jail, even at the lowest of the lows, thought of his dreams and he believed in them and he knew they would come true. And he knew that the only way they would come true is if Yaakov and his sons came to Mitzrayim. If Yosef came home to Canaan, they wouldn't bow to him. But if they came to Mitzrayim, where he was the ruler, they would bow to him. Vayam mekavel lihiyoto sham b'Mitzrayim. Bir'oto hatzlachato hagidola sham. But he thought it could come true in Mitzrayim. If he became successful in Mitzrayim, they'd come and bow to him. Kol shekein acharei sheshama chalom paro shenitbarer lo ki yavo kulam shama v'yitkaimu kol chalomotav. Right? Yosef thought this even when he was in jail. But certainly, now you could tell yourself, when he was in jail, he didn't have the opportunity to send a postcard. Maybe when he was the head of Potiphar's house, he did. Hard to know. But later on, when he became prime minister, then he knew for sure if he could get them there, once the famine years start, they'll come and they'll bow to him. And then his dreams will come true. And if I'm right, that they're not just dreams, but they're nevuot. Right? So he feels obligated in some way to make the nevuot come true, to make the prophecies come true. Okay? So what we've seen is, first of all, says the Ramban, in the first pasuk we saw, the years of plenty were only in Mitzrayim. They were not in the surrounding lands. The famine was in surrounding lands. How does he know this? Because everybody knew what was going on in Egypt. And if they didn't collect food in Chutz La'aretz, it means because they didn't have the food to collect. Okay? Why does Yosef, after he interprets the dreams, say to Paro, give him advice and find somebody to run the country? And the Ramban says, because Yosef wanted Paro to choose him. Because Yosef dreamed big, right? And we see this in the dreams. He wanted his dreams to come true. And so therefore he wanted Paro to pick him to be in charge of the country. Okay? Safnat Paneach. Is it Hebrew or is it Egyptian? Says the Ramban, it's Hebrew. Either Paro asked Yosef, how do you say revealer of secrets in Hebrew? Or Paro knew Hebrew. Either way, he named Yosef Safnat Paneach in Hebrew, as his daughter did years later for Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki min hamayim mishitiu, says the Ramban, it means, for I've drawn you from the water. Egyptians called him Munoz. They wrote his name as Munoz because that's an Egyptian name. As the Ramban later on says, Onkelos only translates the Hebrew, that the names of places that are not known that way in Aramaic. If they're known that way in Aramaic, there's no reason for him to translate it. Okay, same thing with Yosef's name. And finally, secondly, V'heim lo hikiru, why didn't Yosef recognize them? They were all the same age, says the Ramban. It makes complete sense. Context. First of all, Yosef saw the 10 of them together, and he recognized the oldest ones because they really were older than him. But second of all, Yosef was expecting them to come. He wanted them to come. Why did he want them to come? The last Ramban that we saw. Vayizkar Yosef et hachalomot. They did not come true when the brothers bowed to him because there were only 10 of them. He needed to get Binyamin to come. Binyamin did come. They bowed to him. Then and only then could he reveal himself. With a little interlude for the Gavia, where the Ramban thinks Yosef planted the Gavia not for the dreams to come true, but because he wanted to speak to Binyamin in private, because he was worried about the relationship. He was worried about how he treated Binyamin, how they treated Binyamin, and he thought he could help Binyamin privately. Okay, that's it for the Ramban this week. We should all dream big. Chanukah Sameach still, and Shabbat Shalom to all.